I thought divorce would be the hardest betrayal of my life. I was wrong. The real betrayal came quietly, wrapped in family dinners and late-night phone calls, hidden in the smiles of people I once trusted most. My parents' $2 million house, my childhood home, wasn't just walls and memories. It was leverage. It was a weapon they could use against me. And one night, staring at the fine print of papers I wasn't meant to see, I realized if I didn't act now, I would lose everything. What I did next, no one in my family saw coming. After the divorce, I told myself I just needed somewhere quiet, somewhere safe. I drove back to my parents' house, the one that stood like a fortress of my childhood, the one I thought would never change. When I stepped inside, it smelled the same, faintly of lavender and old wood polish. And for a moment, I felt like a little girl again, protected from the storms of the world. My mother hugged me as if I had come home from war. My father patted my shoulder stiffly, a man uncomfortable with emotion. But I told myself it meant something. I wanted it to mean something. The first week, I let myself sink into the comfort. My mother cooked my favorite meals, fussed over me when I fell asleep on the couch, and whispered that she would take care of me until I was whole again. My father offered to handle some paperwork so I wouldn't be overwhelmed. It felt like being wrapped in a cocoon, and after months of lawyers and accusations, I wanted desperately to believe in that cocoon. But even in safety, there were cracks. My mother slipped my credit card from my purse one evening and waved it lightly. "Just let me hold on to this," she said with a smile. "You're too fragile right now. You shouldn't worry about bills." I laughed because it felt easier to laugh, but a knot tightened in my stomach. I told myself it was nothing, just concern. I told myself she was right. I was too tired to argue. Nights stretched long in that house. I would wake at 2 a.m. to the phone ringing, my mother on the other side of the wall whispering into it. Sometimes it was her calling me, asking if I could sit with her because she couldn't sleep. She'd bring up my ex-husband in the gentlest tones, always circling back to how ungrateful I had been to people who sacrificed for me. At those hours, with exhaustion pressing against my temples, I nodded, I apologized, I promised to do better. Then, there were the little disappearances, $50 missing from my wallet, my savings account showing transactions I didn't remember authorizing. "It must be a bank error," my father said, tapping the papers with his pen. "I'll straighten it out." I believed him because I wanted to. What else was there to cling to, if not family? Still, the unease grew. I found envelopes tucked away in my father's desk drawer one afternoon while searching for a stamp. They were marked with the bank's logo, addressed to him. But when I reached for one, his voice startled me from behind. "Looking for something?" His hand closed the drawer firmly, his eyes unreadable. He smiled, but it was a smile too sharp, too controlled. At dinner that night, my brother came by. He teased me for mooching off the parents again, and my mother laughed too quickly, glancing at my father as if waiting for his approval. I swallowed the sting, tried to convince myself it was just a bad joke, just family humor. But lying awake later, staring at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom, I thought about that drawer, about the missing money, about the way my mother clutched my credit card like it was hers. Still, I wanted to believe. I wanted to hold on to the illusion that family was unbreakable. So I convinced myself that tomorrow would be better, that the birthday party my parents had been whispering about, would lift my spirits, that love would triumph over suspicion. I smiled at my reflection the next morning, trying to believe the woman in the mirror was healing, that the cracks in her world were sealing. But even as I whispered, "You're safe now," to myself, a chill passed through me, a warning I could not name. I laughed when my mother kissed my forehead and said softly, "Don't worry about anything. I'll keep all your cards safe until you're strong again." I didn't know it then, but that smile, that promise, was the first link in chains I couldn't yet see. And when I walked out of the kitchen, clutching the warmth of her embrace, I had no idea that the birthday celebration they were planning would be the moment that shattered every last illusion I had left. The birthday was supposed to be small, just family, or so my mother said. She told me to dress nicely, promised it would cheer me up, insisted I didn't need to worry about the details. I clung to that promise like a lifeline, believing maybe for one night I could forget the tension pressing in from every side. That morning, while scrolling through my phone, a notification lit up from my brother's group chat, one I had never been part of. By accident or carelessness, the preview flashed enough for me to see. "Remember, don't mention Claire." My chest tightened. I clicked, and the screen opened to reveal messages. Between my brother, my sister, my parents, and, my breath caught, my ex-husband. They were planning a birthday party, yes, but not for me. It was for my father. And in their laughter-filled texts, they joked about how it would be easier without Claire ruining the mood. The words bled into me like poison. I scrolled further, my hands shaking. My mother wrote, "She's too fragile. Let's keep her out of this one." My sister chimed in, "She's been living here rent-free. She doesn't deserve to be celebrated." Then came the twist of the knife. My ex-husband, the man who had humiliated me in court, replying with a smirk emoji and the words, "She'll never know. Claire's always been blind." I felt the air leave my lungs. Betrayal has a sound, like the world cracking in half, a silence so loud it roars in your ears. I dropped my phone and sank onto the bed, staring at the ceiling, every nerve ending screaming. They hadn't just excluded me. They had mocked me, dismissed me, colluded with the one person who had already destroyed me once. That night, I stayed in my room while the laughter drifted through the walls. Music, clinking glasses, voices raised in cheer. It all washed over me, like waves I wasn't meant to swim in. I pressed a pillow against my ears, but nothing could block out the sound of my family celebrating without me, celebrating the bond they shared, a bond that deliberately excluded me. For the first time, I understood. I was no longer part of them. The following week, my body gave in. The stress, the sleepless nights, the gnawing ache in my chest collapsed into fever and dizziness. I ended up in the emergency room, admitted with dehydration and exhaustion. I lay under the harsh fluorescent lights, the smell of antiseptic burning my nose, waiting for someone, anyone, from my family to appear. I waited through the night. Nurses passed by, checking vitals, offering me cups of ice water, but the chair beside my bed remained empty. I kept glancing at the door, expecting my mother's worried face, my father's stiff nod, my sister's chirpy voice. None of them came. I reached for my phone, staring at the list of contacts, but my hands trembled too hard to press call. My heart whispered, "They'll come. They must come." But the hours bled together, and the truth settled like a stone in my chest. I had been abandoned. At dawn, I watched the sunlight creep across the floor. Sterile and cold, and a hollow silence filled me. There is a kind of loneliness that feels like death while you are still breathing. I had given everything to these people, and when my body finally broke, they didn't even bother to pretend. A nurse adjusted my IV, and I whispered, "Did anyone call?" She shook her head gently, pity in her eyes. That pity burned deeper than any betrayal, because it made me see myself the way outsiders saw me. Alone, unwanted, discarded. I pressed my face into the pillow, tears soaking the thin fabric. Something inside me cracked wide open, and from that wound came a voice I had never heard before. It wasn't the voice of the fragile daughter or the abandoned wife. It was sharper, colder, edged with steel. On that hospital bed, staring at the ceiling tiles, I swore an oath. I would not die this way. I would not be left empty and broken while they laughed in another room. If my family saw me as disposable, then I would stop offering myself to be thrown away. "Never again," I whispered to the silence. "This time I will not die with them." When I came home from the hospital, I no longer looked at my family with the same blind loyalty. Their laughter still rang in my ears. Their absence by my bedside still hollowed me out. I told myself that if I stayed passive, I would be destroyed completely. I needed information. I needed the truth hidden in the shadows they thought I was too fragile to enter. I started with their social media. At night, while the house slept, I scrolled through posts, comments, photos tagged at places I hadn't known they'd gone. My father had always dismissed the internet as useless, yet I found a picture of him in front of the local bank, shaking hands with a manager. The caption from a distant cousin read, "Congrats on the big deal." My stomach turned. What deal? What bank? I dug deeper, following trails of tagged names, geotags, even receipts my sister carelessly posted. Slowly, a pattern emerged. My father had been visiting the bank for months. I pulled old mail from the trash, piecing together torn envelopes. The fragments revealed something I had never imagined. He had mortgaged the house, the $2 million house that stood as the last solid piece of my childhood. The documents showed looming payments, numbers in the hundreds of thousands. The walls seemed to tilt around me. This wasn't just betrayal, it was annihilation. If the bank foreclosed, not only would the house be gone, but I would be left exposed, without even the illusion of stability. My hands shook as I whispered into the dark. If I don't move now, my childhood home will vanish. But how does one woman, battered and alone, stand against an entire family bent on control? The answer came from where I least expected. My aunt, my mother's sister, had always seemed distant, sharp-tongued, critical of everything I did. She had laughed when I failed in school plays, scolded me when I spoke out of turn. I had always filed her under enemy. Yet one afternoon, she slipped a manila envelope across the table when no one else was watching. "You're not as blind as they think," she murmured. Inside were copies of the original house deed, the mortgage contracts, even my father's signed promissory notes. She had kept them quietly for reasons she didn't explain. Her eyes, usually cold, flickered with something almost like guilt. For the first time, I wondered if she had been playing her own long game, or if somewhere deep inside, she had always been waiting for me to see the truth. I clutched the envelope like a lifeline. "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked. Her lips pressed thin. "Because if you don't stop them, no one will." That night, I sat on my bed, the papers spread around me like a map of betrayal. I didn't cry. until I opened my laptop and searched for help. Out of desperation, I stumbled into a Reddit forum, r legal advice. I typed a post, vague enough to protect myself, yet clear in its outline. What do you do if your family secretly mortgaged a house you thought was secure? I expected silence. Instead, replies poured in, cold advice mixed with warnings. Among them, one username stood out. A young attorney, barely a year into practice, offering detailed steps, links to state statutes, even suggestions for trust structures. I messaged him privately, half afraid, but his responses were steady, professional, laced with just enough empathy to remind me I wasn't invisible. Piece by piece, a plan began to take shape. The trust wasn't just an abstract idea anymore. It was a shield, a fortress I could build with the very laws they thought would protect them. At 2 a.m, I sat surrounded by papers, screen glow on my face, tears spilling unchecked. Not because I was broken, but because for the first time, I realized I wasn't utterly alone. There were cracks of light seeping into the dark corners of my world. I pressed my hand over the stack of documents, feeling the weight of both betrayal and possibility. And so, I whispered, the game is no longer one-sided. The plan unfolded in silence. I moved through each step like a shadow, careful not to disturb the fragile illusion my family still believed in, that I was weak, dependent, broken. They thought I slept too much, cried too often, stared blankly at walls. What they didn't know was that every hour spent alone was a calculation, every tear a mask for the steel I was forging inside. With the guidance of the young attorney and the documents my aunt had slipped me, I began the process of creating a private trust. I studied every clause, every loophole, until the legal jargon became a language of survival. My father had mortgaged the house recklessly, but through quiet maneuvering, I transferred the deed into a trust under my name, shielded from their interference. They believed the house still stood vulnerable, but legally it was already out of their grasp. That was only half of it. The twist came when I discovered that some of my father's loans had been bundled and sold as debt packages. With the help of my lawyer, I traced them, and for a sum that nearly drained my savings, I bought them out. On paper, I became not just the protector of the house, but my father's creditor. The irony was sharp enough to taste. The man who had controlled me all my life was now, unknowingly, indebted to me. One evening, I sat at my desk, pen in hand, staring at the final line of documents. The ink shimmered under the lamp as I signed my name. My pulse raced, my breath caught, because I knew the weight of what I held now. Only a single signature separated my family's illusions from the brutal truth. Just one signature, I whispered, and they'll all be on their knees. But revenge wasn't meant to be shouted. It was meant to be revealed at the right moment, like pulling a curtain from a stage. And so I waited, biding my time until Christmas. The house glowed with lights strung across the porch, laughter spilling into the winter air. My family gathered around the long dining table, their smiles brittle but convincing, as if all the fractures between us could be hidden beneath garlands and wine. I sat quietly, letting them chatter, letting them believe. When the plates were cleared and the room settled into a false warmth, I reached into my bag and laid a single document on the table. "What's this?" my brother asked, smirking. "Read it," I said softly. One by one, I placed the papers down: mortgage contracts, loan transfers, trust documents. Their voices faltered, their smiles faded. My father's face drained of color as he recognized his own signature on the debt notes. My mother's hand trembled as she flipped through the trust papers, realizing the house was no longer theirs to control. The silence was thick, then shattered into protests. "You tricked us," my sister shouted. "This is illegal." My father slammed his fist against the table, but his voice cracked. My brother cursed under his breath, unable to deny the evidence staring back at him. For a moment, I let the storm rage. Then I leaned back, calm in the eye of their fury. Nothing here is illegal. Every paper is valid, every step documented. You thought I was weak, but while you were busy laughing, I was building a fortress. The room fell quiet again, but not in acceptance. My mother clutched her chest suddenly, gasping, eyes rolling back. My father leapt to her side, shouting for help. My siblings scrambled, panic bursting like fireworks. For a second, my heart lurched. Was it real? I stood frozen, but then I saw it. The calculated flutter of her lashes, the too perfect timing. She was pretending, turning herself into the victim, a performance to deflect the spotlight. I didn't move. I didn't call for help. I simply watched as the act played out, their cries echoing off the walls, because this too was proof of their manipulation, their endless theater of control. I gathered the papers calmly, sliding them back into my bag as my voice cut through the chaos. "Keep pretending," I said. "Every act you perform is just more evidence of who you really are." I walked out into the cold night air, the snow crunching beneath my feet. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of power finally shifting. I knew then that their games were collapsing, and I held the pieces. But this performance, I whispered into the darkness, only gives me more evidence. The confrontation at Christmas was only the beginning. The documents I had revealed at the table were just one layer of my strategy. The rest unfolded without me lifting a finger. My brother's careless jokes, my sister's bitter texts, even the smug messages from my ex-husband in that group chat. I had them all captured, preserved like artifacts of betrayal. With a few careful uploads, the world saw what I had lived with in silence. The first video went live on TikTok, an anonymous account, no face, just screenshots, voices, and documents. The title read, "When Your Own Family Plots Against You for Money." It didn't take long. Within hours, the comments flooded in. "This is sick. Blood doesn't mean family. Protect yourself, girl." The clip spread like fire through dry grass. Strangers took sides. People stitched it with their own stories, confessing how their families had done the same. My private war was no longer private. It had become a mirror for thousands of others. By the end of the week, my siblings couldn't go anywhere without whispers following them. Their coworkers saw it. Their neighbors saw it. Invitations dried up. Reputations curdled. My father stayed hidden in the house, blinds closed, the once proud man reduced to a shadow. My mother doubled down on her theatrics, but her cries of victimhood fell flat against the mountain of receipts the internet dissected. And then the twist cut deeper. My ex-husband, so smug in his alliance with them, lost his job when the firm he worked for discovered his involvement in the smear against me. The screenshots proved he had conspired not only to ruin me emotionally, but to manipulate assets in ways that flirted dangerously close to fraud. He went from arrogant lawyer to unemployed pariah in the span of a week. For the first time, I didn't feel small when I thought of him. I felt taller. Yet justice isn't always loud. One morning, I sat in a quiet cafe on the edge of town, coffee warm between my palms. No one recognized me, no one asked questions. I breathed, really breathed, for what felt like the first time in years. Outside the window, people walked by laughing, carrying shopping bags, living ordinary lives. And in that ordinariness, I found peace. My chest loosened, and I realized freedom wasn't fireworks. It was silence without fear. But silence couldn't last forever. The legal side of the storm soon arrived. My family tried everything: threats, demands, pleas. My father claimed I had stolen his rights. My sister screamed about betrayal. My mother begged for mercy. But every document was airtight. The private trust stood like a fortress. The house, the land, everything tied to it. They couldn't touch it. For once, I held the final word. When they pushed, the law pushed back. Judges reviewed the papers, and one by one, the rulings confirmed what I already knew. The trust was valid, the debts were mine to collect, and their hands were tied. My father, once the patriarch who believed he could bend everyone to his will, now signed checks to pay me back. His name trembling on every line. They thought time and tears would soften me, that I would forgive simply because we shared blood. But this time, my forgiveness was no longer free. As I watched them stumble, as I saw the weight of their schemes crush them, I whispered to myself, they think I'll forgive, but this time justice has my name written all over it. And yet, standing at the edge of victory, another twist came. Not from them, but from me. I realized I didn't want to destroy them completely. Absolute revenge would have turned me into the same hollow creature they were. Instead, I chose a different path. Controlled release. I enforced the trust, secured the house, collected the debts. But then, when the power was fully mine, I let go of the rest. I cut the chain not to free them, but to free myself. In the end, justice wasn't about watching them burn. It was about stepping away from the fire altogether. I walked out of court the last time with my head high, the trust documents secure in my bag, and a strange calm settling over me. I hadn't just won against them. I had reclaimed myself. The first step to freedom was silence, not the suffocating silence of abandonment I had known in the hospital, but the deliberate silence of boundaries. I blocked my parents' numbers, muted my siblings on every platform, and scrubbed my devices of their lingering presence. No more midnight calls, no more guilt-laden texts, no more ambushes disguised as concern. The house was mine now, but more importantly, so was my voice. At first, saying no felt like swallowing glass. Every refusal brought back the echo of my mother's tears, my father's scolding, my siblings' sneers. But each time I resisted, the glass cut less deeply. No to financial help. No to emotional traps. No to dinners that were nothing more than stages for manipulation. Slowly, the word became lighter, sharper, a shield I could wield without hesitation. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had once surrendered my credit card, and opened a fresh journal. My hand trembled as I wrote the first words. Today, I said no. The ink blurred with tears, but this time they weren't tears of weakness. They were tears of release. By the time I set the pen down, a smile tugged at my lips. My hand still shook, but the weight on my chest was gone. The world outside that house grew larger each day. I reached out to colleagues I had lost touch with, neighbors I had once ignored. Some doors stayed closed, but others opened with warmth I hadn't expected. Invitations to coffee, to book clubs, to small community gatherings trickled in. I went, hesitant at first, but then with growing ease. With every laugh shared, with every hand extended, I began to see that family could be chosen, not assigned. The truest surprise came from my aunt, the one who had given me the documents that saved me. She appeared at my door one morning, a folder in her hand. "I know I haven't been kind to you," she admitted, her voice tight. "But I want to make this right. There's a project I've been working on, and I think you should be part of it." Inside the folder were plans for a small business venture, property management, legal consultancy, the very fields I had been forced to learn out of survival. She wanted me to join her, not as a dependent niece, but as a partner. The offer floored me. All my life, she had been the sharp edge at family gatherings, the critical voice that cut deeper than most. Yet here she was, extending a hand, not in judgment, but in collaboration. I realized then that sometimes allies don't emerge as saviors. They emerge as skeptics who finally see your strength. I accepted, not out of obligation, but out of choice. The project became more than business. It was proof that my skills, my resilience, had value beyond surviving betrayal. Together, we began building something that was ours, free from the poison of manipulation. Still, healing wasn't linear. There were nights I woke drenched in sweat, hearing echoes of laughter from that birthday party, seeing my mother clutching her chest in her false collapse. But instead of spiraling, I wrote. Instead of calling them, I called friends. Instead of retreating, I walked forward. Each step away from them was a step toward myself. And so I began to thrive, not perfectly, not without scars, but with a steadiness I had never known. My chosen family grew, friends who celebrated my victories, colleagues who respected my boundaries, a community that saw me not as a victim, but as a woman who had risen. One evening, I stood on the porch of the house that had once been a cage. The winter air bit at my skin, but inside me burned a quiet fire. The lights in town twinkled in the distance, lives moving on, and I realized I was part of that rhythm now, not an outcast clinging to scraps of love. I whispered into the night, not in fear, but in promise. And if one day they come back, I'll be ready.